Things were beginning to turn around, and I was beginning to have what I characterized as good luck. There I was with a lovely apartment in New York and Chelsea. I had a business that was going, and I had a young daughter. Kathy had been born. A friend of ours, who was a photographer for Holiday magazine, he and his wife were good friends, and they were getting sick of traveling around the world photographing royalty. And they were looking for a place in the country where they could settle down, go on assignments, but not live in New York in the meantime. And every time they would go out on a field trip to look for a place, we'd get together and they'd tell us what they saw, and gradually the bug was beginning to bite us. So one day they told us about this place up in the woods on a road that wasn't yet paved, that was just a log cabin in terrible shape, but it was well within our price range, and it wasn't right for them. It wasn't close enough to the railroad station. In a heavy rain, you might have to go 5 miles around because this road would wash out, and maybe it would interest me. So we came, and I just fell in love with the place. It was god-awful. What's now a lovely pond in the front was a swamp. Inside, the windows were broken. It hadn't been occupied in many, many months. Tree limbs were growing through the windows. There were little snakes lopping around on the floor. Unbelievable. But the price was right. It had 2.5 acres. It had room enough for us to partition off rooms and make room for a nursery for Kathy. And it had an outbuilding that was the studio of the wife of the man who had built the building that I could use for my studio. The price was $23,000. It had 2.5 acres. The taxes on it were $168 a year. There were 6 contiguous acres. Actually, it turned out to be 10 when it was properly surveyed, that he was willing to sell me for $6,000 if I was interested. I didn't have the money, but he said, well, just send me a little money whenever you have it. And he wasn't in a hurry to get it. So we decided we would get a mortgage and buy the place, which we did. But one of the things I loved about it was I liked doing things with my hands, and I could whack a nail into this place without much precision, and it would look as good as what the artist had done. What he had done, actually, is he had cut logs off of his land from chestnut trees that had died out at the turn of the 20th century. Now, if these trees didn't fall on the ground, they were just solid. And he used those as the logs that you see. The stones that you see all came right off the property. At one time, it was a sitting room. When we first moved here, we used all our money to buy the place, and we literally were sitting on boxes with cushions on them and things like that. As time went by, things picked up. We had more and more activities in there. We started having groups up to 25 or 30 people at a time. And we also had conferences there. I especially remember a conference that took place, I would say, it was sometime in the 70s. Captain Kangaroo had been using our things on television, and I was never satisfied with what he did. I started feeling that the time had come when we had to develop a television program of our own. And there were a lot of considerations that I wanted to get advice from authors and illustrators about. I know that they had strong feelings about how meaningful our films were to their books. Maurice Sendak, in an interview, commented that we had emancipated the picture book. We had given it a range that the author and illustrator had never conceived of. So I had a meeting which took place in the living room. The play, what we call the conference room, hadn't been built yet. And I invited, I will tell you, Bob McCloskey was here, Ezra Keats was here, Maurice Sendak was here, Marcia Brown was here, Lily Arjuman was here. Sendak could never sit still without a pen in his hand. And he drew pictures of the people that he thought could conceivably be the host and hostess for the show. Some good ideas came out of that, some directions in which we could move and editorially, and we did all of that. As the business grew, there wasn't room for the numbers of people who came. We could put about 20 to 25 people in there comfortably. But we were having groups of teachers and librarians who came by the busload from as far away as Providence or even Philadelphia for the day. We needed more space. So we built one wing onto the house, which is a room that we think of as the conference room, that seats up to 60 or 65 people. And it has its own kitchen and its own bathroom, but that we could cut off if we wanted the privacy of a home, while at the same time other people on the staff could be entertaining the people who were here for a workshop. We had bought a house that was characterized by the building inspector as the biggest no-bedroom house that he'd ever seen, because Carl made his studio or his bedroom in the back of the studio. We were looking for a way to enlarge the house with bedrooms. We got architects, all of whom said, just get a bulldozer, bulldoze down the stones and the logs and start from scratch. I wasn't about to do that because I'd really tried very hard to bring this back to where Carl Godwin, who had been the builder and owner of the house, had brought it. We just couldn't figure out how to do it until somebody introduced me to a landscape architect who was accustomed to building gazebos out of rough wood and things like that. And she sat down one day, made some sketches that I was very enamored of. And I said, let's do it. We never had an architect make an architectural drawing. I said, this is what it's going to look like on the outside. Now let's take some graph paper and see what it's going to look like on the inside, which she did. She just filled in the space that she projected, and then we started together putting in partitions and making room for bathrooms and closets and hallways and where the windows would be and so forth. Turned out that the windows in the original house were very old because they had been scavenged from houses that had been inundated when the river that ran through Weston was dammed up to make a reservoir for Bridgeport. And Carl Godwin, who had very little money, and that's why he used the building materials right off the property, he went and he bought up these houses which you could buy for $50 if you would cart away the pieces that you took away. They wanted to keep the foundations. It didn't bother them if they were submerged, but they wanted to get rid of the timber. So in the backyard here were piles of secondhand bricks and dormer windows and just plain windows, which were built into the house and worked fine as long as they were put in a place where they didn't have to swing on hinges. So that really was the genesis of the building that we have today. I think that there were two currents working when we were changing this building. And by changing it, I mean adding to it. Because one of the currents was change, making it adaptable to the uses that the activities here were developing. And at the same time, keeping it the way it was. We wanted to keep it the way it was, not only because there was an aesthetic that was terribly appealing. I loved the fact that there was no straight line. It was like an animal habitat that you could really feel at home. You could put your feet up and it wouldn't be impolite. Of all of the occasions we've had here, two in particular come to the fore. One of them was our 50th anniversary, which was in 2003. The mayor of Weston, Woody Bliss, was here, and at lunch, I sat at the same table that he did. It was very informal. You sat where you wanted to. And Woody leaned over and he said to me, "Mort," he said, "I have to thank you for putting Weston on the map." The other occasion was quite a few years ago now. The American Library Association had its annual conference, its convention in New York. And it was customary that they would offer in their prospectus tours, pre-convention and post-convention. Well, I had a telephone call from them, and they said, "We would love to offer a post-convention tour to Weston Woods when we have our convention in New York. Would I consider that?" And I said, "Oh, by all means, we'd love to have them." With the final count, 700 people came here that week. Now, there were key people who I wanted to have, who I didn't even know. And these were people like the board of directors of ALA, the American Library Association. There was buffet supper that was served. And here was a table with a candlelight at the pool. And when I went to that table, I knew one person, and I greeted her. And this woman sitting next to her was somebody from the board of ALA. And the other people at the table were too. And this other woman from the board said, "Mr. Schindel, just what is it that Weston Woods does?" Before I had a chance to answer, Rebecca piped up and she said, "You don't know what Weston Woods does?" And she said, "No." "Well, Weston Woods does for children's books what the Colonel did for chicken." And I just thought that was so appropriate. You know, in those days, Colonel Saunders was really a big deal.